AI is reshaping every category of software. We're particularly excited about a new ecosystem of startups that are shaking up some of the most entrenched categories of business-critical software that have often been regarded as impossible to replace. These are the companies that will take us from legacy systems of record to AI systems of action. I'm Mike Drosch, partner at Bessemer Venture Partners.
And I'm Darsh Patel, an investor here at Bessemer. And in this series, we're pulling back the curtain on our internal road mapping process as we speak to founders of the startups making this happen. We're candidly still learning and debating how this market will evolve as we build out our thesis, and we're excited to share that process with you. This is Systems of Action.
Today's guest is Sandeep Chopra, the co-founder and co-CEO of Everest Systems. Sandeep comes from an impressive product background, most recently leading product management at Viva Systems before co-founding Everest. He linked up with two veteran engineering leaders from SAP, who spent almost 50 years between them building ERP systems for the market leader. They're now on a mission to rebuild ERP systems for the modern era, starting with an ERP for software companies. Sandeep, thanks so much for being here. We're really glad we had the chance to sit down and do this in person. I think just to start, we'd love to hear kind of what was the inspiration for bringing this founding team together, and what made you all think that this was possible today to unseat some of the biggest incumbents in software?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I think the journey of Everest and to start like a net new ERP company from scratch, you had to do a few things just differently. I'll give you a sense of where I came from. My career has been a diverse one. I started my career, academic background in computer science and economics, started my career in management consulting at Deloitte when they were starting a new practice area called security and privacy. This is post-Sarbanes, 2005 and 6. And while you might think of security and privacy as malware and vulnerability management and so on, really the approach that you could imagine an accounting management consulting firm took was much more about business process and data. And so really what we were selling to all these people was an understanding of business risk, understanding business processes, which are being very, very industry specific. Obviously, SAP, Oracle, and the giants are a huge part of how companies like Deloitte ultimately make money on the technology consulting side. And from then on, I went into application infrastructure at a company that was a Solex partner to SAP, meaning SAP's reps sold that software on their paper, and ended up at Viva, not from a pharmaceutical side, even though it sells it as pharmaceutical companies, but really from the technology product side, reimagining how the industry cloud would shape some of these tough problems, which was a combination of kind of software, services, and data. And those were the experiences, really all the common thread across all those things was business process, industry specificity, cloud native software, where it's the software, the services, and the data have to all come together to solve these hard problems. That led me to Sutter Hill Ventures. I was an entrepreneur in residence there and looking into deep systems of record, certainly ERP being one of them. The system of record, if there is one, and really starting the company was all about the team. It was meeting Franz, who was previously EVP of technology at SAP. He led their big 1.0 projects, including HANA and Data Hub, and Joachim, who was previously chief development architect of SAP Business by Design. And I think having the right team and the right people at the start, knowing that the ERP market, and we'll get into that in a second, was in a place to be disrupted, and with the right investors and partnership in mind is what the company helped me off the ground.
I think the really funny thing about the origin is obviously, still a large contingency of the team is based in Germany, local to SAP, right? Like down the street, kind of like Magneto, Professor X. Why is that important? Like having like that contingency in that area.
Our main R&D site is in Heidelberg. It's in Germany, and it's 30 minutes away from SAP's headquarters. Our main kind of product management, sales, and service site is in Mountain View, and we have a couple other offices as well, one in the UK and one in Brazil. But the reason why, to continue your question, the reason why it's so important to have that DNA at the start of the company is because the problems, that ERP is such a vast piece of software. And it's not just one trend that we believe will allow us to go from point A to point B. It's the combination of business trends and technology trends and deep, deep domain knowledge of what it means to build a system like this. And SAP has frankly dominated that market for 30 plus years. Look at the largest companies in the world. Most of them run SAP, even today, for the core ERP. And so I think having that deep knowledge was a prerequisite, in my opinion, to starting this company.
I think when we first met, you said something crazy. 99% of people on the planet that actually know how to build an ERP are in Germany.
I think there are different definitions of what ERP is out there, but I think if you follow the definition of ERP, that it's meant to run your business end to end, starting with finance and accounting, but then the adjacencies next to that. I think that it's a unique market in that way. Most leading software companies in the world and in most markets that are in software have been defined, I think, by, for the most part, US-based companies. And the ERP market was actually defined by SAP. And so I think being faithful to what this market is and understanding the depth and the complexity of it, I think would require you to have that DNA in your company.
So in addition to having this unique team, you've also taken a bit of a unique approach, at least relative to most of the startups we meet, where they're going to raise a little bit of money, start with a small product, maybe sell it to SMBs, slowly expand the product, and slowly move up market over time. I mean, at least from the outside, it seems like you guys have looked at, if we're going to replace a massive piece of software, we have to build a really end-to-end, fulsome product. And so we'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about the approach of how much product to build, how long it's taken to get the place where you feel like this is a product that we can go out and win the market with.
And I think your take on this is going to be particularly unique because Viva built a massive business on top of Salesforce until eventually one day they cut Salesforce's head off. So talk to us about why not be a layer on top, why be end to end, why do it from day one?
Yeah, no, so I was part of Viva as, I would say, part two of Viva. Part one of Viva was exactly what you said, was the CRM application specific to pharmaceuticals on top of Salesforce. Part two of Viva was brilliantly its own platform, funded by the success of the first business. And I was part of that team. I led one of the product lines in the quality and manufacturing segment, which, by the way, is also notoriously conservative and hard to change. So have some experience in those kinds of things. And I think that, what makes that kind of journey work, and I think what inspired some of the thinking early on at Everest was very clear from the Viva experience, at least to me, was if you really wanted to partner with these industries in a very meaningful way going forward, you had to provide some sort of thinking model on how to execute their business in their industry. And that's really what the industry cloud is supposed to mean. It's the combination of software plus the business process knowledge plus the data that accompanies it to help run the businesses better so the company can focus on its core things, which is what products do they want to launch? What markets do they want to be in, as opposed to building and rebuilding systems all the time. And so that might sound new, but actually, if you look at SAP, they've been doing that for decades.
Correct.
So that's what they did in the 90s with R3 in particular. That's what made this global massive powerhouse. And particularly in certain industries like manufacturing, SAP really ran that industry much, much better, causing it to be so entrenched.
What part of the platform is most important? And I think Everest is also unique in the fact that you're building specifically for software businesses from day one. What's the nuance to the software business model that requires something like Everest? Is there a particular piece of the suite that resonates more with your customers? How are you thinking about product strategy in general? And how does it flow down from the fact that you're building purpose-built from day one for software?
So at the start of the company, we had some pretty clear ideas about how the next generation of ERP was going to evolve from a technology standpoint. But then there is this other thing, which is where are you going to aim that technology?
Right.
Because ERPs are so entrenched, so industry specific by their very nature, as I just mentioned earlier, that, you could build it for everything, but that's a 20-year plus journey. You could build it very generic that everyone could use it, but that's not magical enough for someone to change it. So it's how do you find the right combination of a horizontal and an industry-specific focus with the technology investments that you're going to make to be able to kind of find the right beachhead to get started. So before we wrote a lot of our production code, we just spent time talking to hundreds and hundreds of customers early on across many industries, from manufacturing to healthcare, financial services, certainly software as well. What became pretty clear was, look, there are pain points in every industry, but when you're going into a really entrenched market, what you're trying to fight is inertia. And so which market will give you hope, the least amount of inertia? Why not pick the industry that, one, frankly, we understand the business processes really well, and it's more venture-backed than any other industry in the world. That venture-backed nature of the industry forces it to change faster than any industry in the world, and that means it's going to put pressure on its business process and its core operations. So when we talked to customers in there, what we realized about software now in particular was it was fragmented, like many other industries are in ERP today, but it was incredibly fragmented. It was fragmented at the core of what made that industry what it is, meaning like what makes the software industry move so fast? Well, in the last 20 years, because of cloud, because of subscription models and consumption models, people have been able to just build products and get them to market so much faster than ever before. They're changing their business models. They're changing how they price. They're changing, I think, which markets they're able to enter, especially after COVID. They're entering global markets much faster. All of that is just pressure on your ERP, and how people are responding to it is they're just buying systems for every point problem. And this has been going on for 20 years now, and it's become, from our point of view, incredibly painful because everyone's just solving the next problem they can see for the next 6 months. And then something changes in the business, and then they solve the next problem. And so we thought, okay, well, we can look at this holistically. We can solve for the problems of today. But we also know that our prediction about the problems of today is about as good as anyone else's prediction, meaning it's going to change a year from now. So we had to build a better platform fundamentally that allows you to somehow innovate faster with your ERP than anyone else.
Maybe to bring it to life a little bit more, like what are some of the common pain points or use cases that a software company has where the traditional ERP vendors have not served them well, and like some of these differentiating product points that you guys have been building around?
So take the life cycle of a company as it starts. Every company in the US, almost every company in the US is using outsourced accountants at the start of the company and using QuickBooks Online. And if you're in the UK or some of the Commonwealth countries, it's maybe zero. But there are essentially bookkeeping platforms out there, and I think they generally do a good job, and they have a huge customer base to kind of get you to do just record your journal entries in the system. Now, most founders and executives of the company don't actually know all these things. It's just being handled so they can focus on the business. So, but there's some business events start to happen. You start to sort of say, okay, I'm going to start billing my customers. I'm going to have a subscription model. So I'm going to go buy a billing bolt-on. Then my revenue starts to get complicated because I'm not just doing self-serve contracts anymore. I'm going to start doing some B2B complicated contracts with some discounts. And I want to give my sales team flexibility because I'm going to prioritize ARR surely over cost in the early days. And then you will buy a revenue-specific solution. Over on the cost side, you are now expanding your operations with people and PEOs more rapidly than ever before. So you have to have some solution to manage that part of it. You have to have some solution to manage cloud costs because your cloud costs start to rise, especially now with AI. And so these are all the point decisions that you're making along the way, along with a bunch of other systems like for expense management and bills and credit cards that any business needs. That's not industry specific. But these other things are industry specific. And so that's the journey a typical company goes on. And then it sort of says to itself at some point, wow, that's a hot mess. Okay, I'm going to go like bring in people that know what they're doing in finance and accounting and like go implement my first ERP, which, is NetSuite or Intact or a solution like that. And then I kind of graduate from there. But what people end up doing is oftentimes this hot mess is not whittling down. It's being integrated to these existing systems, and the hot mess just grows as you change the company. It all kind of works as long as the status quo, your business doesn't change. But say you're going to now move from a subscription model to a consumption model, and you've got all this like duct tape and spreadsheets and a bunch of systems and integrations around it. Your ability to change at that point, now your business has gotten more complex, it's almost impossible to change. You're going to hold off changing business models for years. You might hold off an IPO because you're not able to actually move through how your business needs to move in order to accommodate what's happening on the market side.
So it certainly makes sense in terms of there's all of these new demands that this customer base has, and the focus on software companies makes a ton of sense. We haven't talked as much about like on the technology side, what's changed, and like be curious to hear a little bit of like the why now from the capabilities that we now have, or we haven't talked much yet about the potential role that AI plays in both configuration of these systems and actually the value they can provide from workflow automation perspective. Given that you guys are starting from a blank slate now, how have you been able to rebuild with the new capabilities we have that certainly the SAP team didn't have 40 years ago?
One of the biggest things that are hard about ERP is actually the biggest thing that's hard is change management. Why do all these point solutions exist in the first place? Is because that the legacy ERP players have not been able to evolve to all these models, right? So I'm not saying a new story. I'm saying everyone knows that you want to be having your billing and your revenue and your costs all tied together in one system. So why not run your business better? So what we really focused on from the very start of the company, and this was kind of independent of industry to my point earlier, was we rethought fundamentally how change management and customizations happen in a system like this, right? If you look at like ERP systems out there, every company in the world has got the code that's been shipped by the software vendor, and then there's the millions of lines of customization on top of the code that's been shipped by the software vendor. And when you add all that up together for a big company, that's really, really hard to change, and it's mission critical. So what we invented, and that's probably been our biggest technical innovation, I would say, is this brand new way of doing change management, where changes don't happen outside the system. They actually happen inside your production system, which would be like sacrilege, right? Like you got like your financials,
break that.
So your changes happen inside the system, but they happen in this isolated, secure sandboxing environment, technology that we call Live Sandbox. And it's an environment that lets you simulate any change to the business, right? So and that applies equally to business users and technology users. So business users are not going to write code. They might write prompts that generate code, but they're not going to write the code themselves or not maintain the code. So the business users can simulate contracts and changes to the business, a pricing term, a billing term, for example. They can forecast usage. The technical folks can actually build and deploy features inside the system, see the impact on it on live production data, and then if it all works well, publish it inside the system, right? Let me just make an analogy to Excel. So a lot of folks use Excel. So in Excel, if you want to make a change to a mission critical file, you could just keep making a V2 and a V3 and keep data in.
And final.
Right. I did that at Deloitte in my early days too. I had lots of finals. I had folders of just finals and subfolders of finals within those. So you do all that. And then it's like, okay, but which changes do I like? And which file does it go into? And then people have these debates. And then if you're brave enough, then you're going to have all your changes tracked in the file itself. And then you prove and publish the changes in that special file. Well, so I think in a very ERP way, what we've given you the ability is to be able to review, simulate, and publish inside of that one thing, all of the changes that you ever wanted. And we think that that's magical, because that means you only ever need one system to run the entirety of your company forever.
I love that you brought up the change management piece, because this is one we've been discussing a lot. And frankly, like when we presented this thesis internally, Darsh and I are excited about modern systems of record. But a lot of our partners looked at us like that we were kind of crazy. Like, this has been one of the most difficult markets to displace. Do we really think it's possible to build a new ERP system today? And part of our thesis has been, traditionally the incumbents have used this change management as kind of a moat. Like, you've spent so much time customizing your system with us, and you've spent millions of dollars and years on the implementation, that you're surely not going to leave us now to go do that again with a new vendor. It sounds like how do you feel like the change management capabilities you've built into the product will also enable you from a go-to-market perspective to actually make it easier to onboard or easier to switch customers from a legacy system of record?
It just changes the whole game. It changes the if the cloud was about moving to a better model of deploying software and a better business model around subscriptions and then consumption that was more over time as opposed to all up front, this is a fundamental change to how you consume software and how you consume software and how you change software on the business user side. And on the development side, it's a fundamental change to the SDLC itself, right? Because you're just be building and deploying inside the system. And so on the business user side, how it's going to change and where it helps to go to market is, we've actually been pleasantly surprised. We thought, oh, this stuff is technical, right? It's sandboxing, simulation. And we've got accountants using words like, hey, I'm going to go simulate a contract, share it with my CEO. They're going to review the contract and the impact to ARR on the business, and I'm going to merge it inside the system. I never thought I'd hear an accountant say, I'm going to merge a change inside a system before, but really to me, it is bringing ideas that have existed in the world of development and making it super accessible to just normal everyday use.
Like FP&A and OSB. Like, can you review my PR, CFO, LG? That's going to be good.
So I think that helps your go to market, because I think it helps companies adapt their business so much faster. and I can talk about it. And it's just an easier way to just say, just go use the product and see if you can simulate your business any differently than you can.
Maybe just on this point, because I do think it's so interesting, like give us an example of something that a non-technical user would be able to prompt in the system, where traditionally you're talking about hiring an SI or something to make a change in custom code.
We had an opportunity recently where a customer would be able, they were trying to understand the business that they have, and they're kind of graduating, as many businesses are early on, from like a self-serve kind of B2C kind of motion to a B2B, more complicated contracts motion. And they're trying to understand the mix of contracts that they have. And if some of these B2C customers were to change to more of the B2B style motion with the discounting, how that would impact their ARR and their financials going forward. So that's, so doing that inside the system essentially required you to be able to go into a sandbox with a click of a button in a second. And then you start adding some attributes to indicate which these customers that you're interested in. Then you simulate some of these contracts that are these more B2B style contracts that are converted from B2C. And then you can just do the what if and compare the B2B contract to the B2B to B2C style contract.
Build it into an ARR bridge.
You just build the whole system. You could close your books if you wanted with the B. Hypothetically. So and you just run it, and then if you like it, then you're done. And then I wouldn't talk about AI a whole lot yet, but I'll maybe make a plug for AI here, which is AI just supercharges all of it, because AI is, as you know, is just giving just kind of superpowers to business users through prompting. And if you have got a system that can go from prompt to feature inside the ERP, now you can not just do the things I'm talking about, you can build custom reports, you can build systems extensions without requiring that to.
And the reason this is possible with a high degree of accuracy or low failure rate in terms of software that just doesn't work once your user prompting for it is the fact that it's all built on the same primitives, that all the building blocks stay relatively consistent. It's just about how you.
Yeah, I think that's where the value of the platform is just so critical. That, and I think that is the question going forward. Like, what is the value of these systems of record and the platforms that are powering them? I think the value, because a lot of people are going to be able to build apps very fast, and that much is already very clear, right? So then what is the value of the platform? The value of the platform from our point of view is it is about bringing all these apps to form something cohesive together.
Context of the business.
The context of the business, the understanding of the business processes and how they connect, to provide obviously some shared services from a technology standpoint and simulation and sandboxing, but also, now getting back to kind of the details of ERP, is to provide the guardrails. Right? Like, you can't have your accounting being made up.
Yeah.
And so the system's got to guarantee that there's safety being provided, both in terms of the technology, but also the business requirements that are going to satisfy the legal things that you have in mind. And I think that's the value of these systems going forward.
I think the way we've described it is like wrapping deterministic guardrails around what have become probabilistic processes.
Exactly.
In many ways.
And then, of course, the business process to be able to simulate and test and tweak it. And then that's where the sandboxing comes into play, because not every change or every contract scenario is a good one for your business. And so you have to figure out which version of the spreadsheet works really well, and that's the version you choose to deploy.
Yeah.
And I think as that brings us to go to market a little bit, like one of the other areas where we've been really curious about seeing AI playing a role is in helping with traditionally the people heavy services work of system implementation, mapping business processes to the configurations within a platform like this, and helping to automate a lot of the like custom code generation that typically would be required from an SI. So as you start going to market with customers, either greenfield or brownfield deployments, like how much of a services component is there, and how much are you seeing opportunities for AI to help accelerate this onboarding and integration phase?
Yeah, I think we just had a customer, one of our customers go live that is a replacement of one of the leading legacy ERP providers, and that's in this particular case. And they had spent over $200,000 in services, right? And this is not uncommon, by the way.
It might be small.
Right, exactly. And so the services far outweighed the cost of software, which sounds like, are we still living in 2025? But that is reality. And this is because their business is complex, right? It's not like a simple ratable business where it's per user per month and it's running off Stripe. It's like custom contracts, custom discounting. You're dealing with big companies. The terms are different.
They have professional services themselves.
It's 80% of it is, even though they have ERP and these systems, it's still 80% running on spreadsheets. If you look at the day-to-day work that's happening, right? So hundreds of thousands of dollars in services. And so they're obviously able to streamline that entire process and replace multiple systems and spreadsheets and duct tapes and workarounds. But I think the larger benefit for them, not going back to the services part and your question more directly, is one of the capabilities of these systems going forward is you bring it together and connect the business processes, is you can't make integrations always someone else's problem. So it's like IT's problem, it's the consulting company's problem. And so I think you have to take ownership of that problem. Why? Because ultimately you take ownership of the data, because that's the data downstream is powering your business. So the early investment that we made very, very early on in our own platform is we had to build, in addition to kind of a transactional data platform, an integration platform inside of Everest itself. So we connect directly to many of these popular integrations, but we don't assume, and this is the key thing, we don't assume the data coming in is clean, because it's not clean. Like a sales rep didn't exactly always end up writing the data per the intricacies of what finance wanted. They're just trying to get business done so they can close the quarter. And so we don't assume the data is clean. So our integration technology provides then the ETL tools and the mapping and the data cleaning services to be able to transform the data to be financially rigorous data for the company.
And I think Mike's question is interesting because it begs the question of where do you focus early on? Because I think the complexity of integration is consummate with the complexity of the business and the size of the business. What's the ICP today? Are you working with like the very large SaaS businesses, like maybe not OneStream because, overlap? Is that the size of software business you're generally targeting and going after? Is it more mid-market? Is it growth stage VC-backed software startups? How are you thinking about what makes the most sense to land it with today?
So we're starting mid-market, and I think that would be like, late stage QuickBooks customers that are like, they've started to Frankenstein already, or they're already on ERP, as I was mentioning earlier. And the reason for that really, I think, is it's not about the platform or the technology to scale, it's about referenceability. Ultimately, you are selling to, it's the single most mission critical system for a running company. You're selling to the CFO. And I think a lot of the folks, rightfully so, are going to make decisions based on who else in their peer group has made a similar decision. And then oftentimes they'll look to the largest, the lower level company that you have, if you will, to be able to make that decision. So I think that was always the intention. Start mid-market, get your referenceable customers, but more importantly, from the get-go, get replacements. Don't just do upgrades of bookkeeping systems, because the proof point, the upgrade should work, right? And that they should provide a ton of value. But the proof point of the success of this mission early on even is, can you make the replacements a lot better? And I think we're seeing that proof right off of that.
That's amazing, because I do think that is clearly the hardest piece of this market. And it's the reason why people have been so skeptical that it's possible to do these replacements. Like, can you give us a sense, like how much you can shrink the time or the pain that's involved in a replacement? Because one of the ways we think of it, like, to build a really compelling new company in this category, you either need to have like 10x more compelling product, or you need to reduce the pain of switching 10x, and ideally it's a little bit of both. And so how do you think about the combination of like reduce the pain to switch and make the incentive to switch much, much higher?
Yeah, so to give you a concrete example, the customer I was mentioning here recently with the complicated one-off contracts and 80% of the work effectively on spreadsheets, even though they had ERP, they did their ERP implementation in 3 phases over 18 months and cost them well over $200,000. And this is a mid-market company. Our implementation was done end-to-end in less than 3 months, right? And it was delivered by our team. And part of that's not just the technology and the integrations and everything else I mentioned. Part of it is also just domain expertise. So you're giving them guidance on how to construct their business processes so they can have streamlined workflows. And that guidance is also the knowledge of the business process itself. So a chunk of our team, especially our US team, has got deep business process knowledge on how to take companies from Series B to IPO. And when you hire that first VP of finance and they end up building out their team, they hire, obviously they have a controller, they have a director of revenue, they have a person running GL/P2P. We have those kinds of people that have done this for scaling companies through the IPO journey, which I think is very different than that very early journey where you're just making journal entries. And then that knowledge is actually inside the product, and it's also dispensed through the implementation process.
It seems like you're also being picky about your early customers, people who are really invested in making their business more efficient and all the downstream benefits that they'll see after implementing Everest. And what are their early learnings from as you start kind of exposing Everest to the world, letting it take its first steps, things like?
Yeah, I think one of the big lessons is always you need the right kind of believer on taking on a big project like this at every stage, right? So there are customers that are not a good fit for us, and that could be because, frankly, ERP is not an important imperative for them. No. And maybe that's right for their business, right? If you're very happy sort of if you don't have confidence where your business is, or you're just happy sort of like figuring out a couple tools and making them all work together, even though you might be taking on a higher total cost of ownership, maybe that's okay for your business. We wanted customers that see the value of an ERP. Now, those kinds of customers have certain attributes. They have backgrounds having scaled companies before, because they have seen the pain of what they could and couldn't do as they went from Series B to IPO and beyond. So I think, yes, I do think we tend to partner with customers and qualify them just as much as they qualify us, because you want the right partner so you can build the right end-to-end story, and then have them sing your praises in a genuine way, but in a way that honestly take us out of the equation. Given their backgrounds, they are inherently more credible to their peer base. So I think it is a very intentional journey, and I think it's more about quality rather than quantity right off the bat, because it's getting those deployments right. It's getting that value provided to the customer, and then you have the confidence that you can go not just do the smaller replacements, you can go after the $100 million plus replacements.
So you're hosting a lot of CFO dinners.
That is the plan going forward. First, you have referenceable customers, and you have the CFO dinners.
Love it. I think even where you are today is a massive market. I mean, it's our ERP, arguably one of the biggest markets in software. And I'm just curious how you think about expanding from our growth stage, let's call it software companies. Next, do you go up market within software explicitly? Do you start to expand across other similar size businesses and other verticals? Like over the next few years, how do you think about it?
I think that I think if you get those early customers successful and you have the real confidence that you are doing a real ERP system, I think the market just pulls you very naturally, because there's just so much opportunity. So it's very logical for a company that gets good at, say, the business models of SaaS and consumption, and has a financial and operational system that you can grow with cloud costs and people costs, to then say, well, what if that system also had inventory? Because that's an aspect of my business too. And there's tons of industries that are powered based on inventory management. What if you had professional services in addition to the product-oriented quote-to-cash process that we have? So I think the adjacencies are almost naturally coming our way, and we're starting to invest in those. And I think as the business grows, it will grow out of SaaS to other adjacent and then other verticals in general.
Any examples of customers who are doing something different than they previously would have been able to by using the platform?
Just this week, I was actually on a call with a customer who was one of our reference customers, and providing us testimonials. And I asked that very question. And so I'm just going to tell you what I heard, which is, you do all of your work outside the ERP in some system on a spreadsheet. You post the final answer into the ERP. You produce your financials. Your executives don't log in. You give them the final answer on a spreadsheet. Right. They produce that to the board. Okay. And what this person is doing is they're saying, my executives are logging into the ERP. My CEO is logging into
their logins yet.
My CEO is logging into a thing that you call Live Sandbox, because I'm working with them to explain to them how the business is running, where the complicated contracts are going, and it's all right there. And so I think that, to me, that's the impact of the business. And I think a lot of these systems have really, as time has gone on, a lot of the work of getting the work done, call it the transactional work or the business process work, is like what the systems do. And all of like the analysis and the decision-making is all completely outside the system. And I think that's not the best way to work, obviously. But I think the tools have not been there. The business processes have not been there to be able to take that kind of thing on. And I think that's about to change.
I mean, that's a great example of like you guys being a full system of record and system of action. People are actually doing the work in the product, because I think the traditional systems of record have left this gap where like a lot of customers treat them like a database that I don't really want to touch. And instead we'll buy these point solutions on top where we do the work and we do the analysis. And so it's pretty compelling to see that you actually have people.
For us as software people, I think that motion feels somewhat natural. Everyone's like living in these things all day.
Right.
But it's funny that, business planning and ERP were kind of the first function to get softwareized when the movement happened. Like you're like attacking tech debt in the form of building.
I think that's a really actually insightful way to say it, because I think it is a little bit of like, hey, maybe just to say a point a different way, which is like people that have been living in technology their whole life, in particular developers, this is how they work. That's why they're productive. And they are very, and if you've been around a development organization, if they're not productive, they are angry. And in a good way, because it makes the business go faster. I think if you were to take some of those same ideas and make them accessible, and obviously provide the product and technology around it, the infrastructure around it, I do think it can make your business people as productive as your development organization.
Well, at the end of these, we usually do like this rapid fire round. And the first one is, what does the business look like 10 years from now? What's it going to take to bring that vision to life too over the next couple of years?
I think if you look at the history of the ERP market, right, you could say there, in a simple way, there are like two ways to build your ERP.
Right.
And this has been around for like 30 something years, which is like, you take the business processes that are in the product. SAP is the best example of that, back in the day with manufacturing in particular. And you take those business processes and you make your business fit them, right? And then you follow the best practices of the business. You don't customize so much, and you can run your business better. Instead of having 5-year implementation projects, you can do a 9-month implementation project, right? And then there's the other approach, which I think is more often what you would have found with deployments from Oracle, for example, right? Which is like, here's a toolkit ERP, right? And in the toolkit ERP, you are like, we're going to give you a bunch of pieces, and then you do what you need to for your business, right? And I think that, clearly I think one was the dominating player in that market, but I think there are times and places for both, for every company. If you are doing what the industry is doing, you should do one. If you are doing something different, or you need to go experiment in a new market to do something different, and you're constrained by some very rigid and centralized way of doing things, you're not going to do the right thing for your business. So I think the long-term vision from my point of view, and I think our team's point of view for ERP is, why can't ERP do both, right? Why can't ERP give you the point of view of the industry and the business process? And if your business is like that, you have fast deployment cycles, and you have all the changes that will come in the future, and the future features made by the vendor just fit it, and you're just good to go run your business. But if you want to do things differently, right, with the technologies like sandboxing, with prompting in AI, with the fact that you can run development so much faster than ever before, inside the system, tested and simulated, your SDLCs right there, right? You can do the second part too. And it's up to you ultimately, because I think we're going to provide the tools to the platform to be able to do both the business process inside or custom, and it's still going to have the guardrails provided by the system.
This is one of the categories that might have some of the longest standing incumbents that have not been disrupted yet by modern software. And so curious, as you look out long term, how do you think the incumbents stand up?
I believe ultimately they have to follow what customers need. If the customer's been given a different choice to be flexible, point in version A versus version B, and you don't evolve, then you have to change your business. That may mean that they have to take a stronger look at the services side of their business to see how they can bring that closer toward product, or to become a different kind of company to be able to enable those kinds of use cases.
Well, I think what we love to end on is just advice to other founders who are building in system of record categories. Because I think, first, you've got experience both in the CRM world, now in ERP, so you're uniquely qualified to weigh in on this. Empathize for a lot of the founders who are trying to displace the systems of record, because probably everyone has told them that's really hard. Like, don't buy it. And so I think there's naturally skepticism that this is a hard thing to do. And we'd love if you've got any advice for founders who are willing to take on this bold ambition of trying to replace these incumbents.
It's helpful to know from the customer standpoint, what kind of product are you trying to build and for whom? Let me go down one level. You asked this question about who are the new exciting players. I think first you should sort of say like, okay, is it the dairy farmer agricultural business I'm really interested in? Or am I really interested in selling to like the largest companies in the world that are building software products and manufacturing products, right? Then working backwards from that, I think you have to ask yourself, am I going to, now tactically speaking, am I going to build like a star system? Or am I going to build like a planet system, right? Because I think it's really hard if you're going to go build a planet system to go build a star system after. I think if you build a great star system, you can be around many planetary systems and build them over time. You may not be great at all of them, or you can enable other people to build planet systems on top of you, right? So that'd be the classic way of building a platform company. But I think that you have to make that decision up front. I think both are okay. But I think if you know where you're aiming, and if you understand the depth of the problem that you're going after well enough, I think either strategy could work. So I think that's what my advice actually would be there, which is I think they're both ways to build good companies. And I think you can have tons of great happy customers and employees, investors. I just think you want to be intentional about, are you trying to solve a very specific problem for a very, very niche area? And I think there's plenty of money to be made there. Or are you trying to enable a bunch of niche areas? You'll pick some strategic ones, but really what you're doing is you want to build and own the star system.
Fantastic. Well, Sandeep, thanks so much for taking the time to come and chat with us. I think you guys have clearly taken one of the most ambitious approaches that we've seen to this massive opportunity. and it was fantastic to chat with you about it.